when I'm good at it, I'm pretty good at it. But it has to be an inspiration out of nowhere. When I can get involved in it. I was telling my sister a made-up story yesterday. And I got so involved in it, I started even tearing up when I was talking about it. It was just this made-up story about, I was treating it like it was a true story. Let me set the scene. And I was talking about, isn't there, forgive me if this calls to mind any truth and trauma for the person who may have been involved. I don't want to get people go scrambling looking at this YouTube video of this event I'm about to describe, which already has 25 million views or 100 million views maybe. But so I apologize if I bring extra aggravation to that poor person or anybody who was traumatized by this event. But you can rest assured that nobody's going to watch this video, so it's not really that big of a deal. But I'm not trying to be a National Enquirer with it, right? I wasn't trying to be voyeuristic or, voyeur, someone who likes to show off or someone who likes to look at people who are showing off. I think voyeur is the one who does the showing off, so not the voyeur watcher. I'm not trying to be that guy, but anyway. So I was imagining, I remembered a story where there was somebody on a 737 flying across the country, full plane, that had to land, emergency land, because someone made a movement of their bowels or something. And it got so bad they had to land the plane. And I started talking about that I don't know why. There was some sort of a sequitur, but I don't remember it now. Just these experiences that you feel for these people who have these experiences. That's what it was. I was sneezing, and I was talking about my sneezing video. My sister, what kind of a sneezer are you? And she didn't know what I was talking about. I was shocked. I was like, are you a 2 sneezer or 1 sneezer or 3 sneezer? Are you one of those poor people who have those 15-minute long sneeze fits like 3 or 4 times a day, and that just nobody can even, you don't realize how long a 15-minute sneezing fit is until you're in the midst of one or you're around it. And it's a bit of a spiritual practice for everybody involved. You ever sat on a transit bus, public transportation bus, with somebody in the back who's sneezing for 15 straight minutes? It drives you crazy. Everyone has to get off the bus. They're just, right? So what about if you're on a plane and somebody, has an accident, but it's so foul that they have to park the plane? Just think about that experience for that person who pooped their pants. They didn't try to do that. If it's a prank, then, that's pretty mean. But no. I don't know if this really happened or if I made it up, but I didn't read an article about it. But I was talking to my sister this whole story, and I was talking like it was real, but it could have been made up. But could you imagine? They had to be on that plane. It was 2 hours before they landed that plane from the time of the pooping. At first, it's just, and it's not a major, maybe. I don't know what it could be, but it's a noisefully loud one, if you know what I'm saying. It's a smelly one, but it starts slow. And at first, the pooper is the only one who knows, which that's the way, hopefully, it could be kept. Not even sure, was it but fairly quickly thereafter, that person, the pooper, it's got to be like a claustrophobic experience, right? Like, if you're claustrophobic, you get into a tight space somehow, and the first couple of seconds are okay, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna just take a deep breath or whatever. You can't, and then within 10 seconds, you have to they got to stop the car and you got to get out, right? It happens fast. It goes from 0 to 100. That's the way people say that, I guess. I'm still learning some of these colloquialisms. You get 0 to 1,000 so fast. So, back to the pooper. You have it. Can't quite tell, maybe. Maybe you got a little swamp donkey going on. I don't know how you couldn't tell, but whatever. Or you're just hoping that, oh my gosh, Very quickly, though, you go from, did this just happen? When you don't even know it stunned you, and you're on a plane, and you're thinking, man, I hope I'm the only one who can. And pretty soon, your neighbors are looking at you. And then it's all of a sudden, it just starts to get overwhelming. But not to the whole plane yet. Nobody's thinking of parking the plane. But you know, there's nothing you can do. And I was telling the story better before. I'm not really into it the way I was before. But it was that poor person who's got to sit there in their own mess and just wait for the plane. And you just constantly, you're just keeping hoping that it just doesn't get any worse. And, you know, the action has stopped, but the odor, it just starts to fill the entire jet. People start getting talkative. People start getting maybe a little upset. People start complaining maybe. Some people may be getting sick. You know. That starts happening after about 40 minutes. That dude's just stewing in his poops for 40 minutes. Before it starts to become maybe obnoxious for everybody, though. Like, the smell's bad. But some of these people on the plane don't have you know, they're not able to contain themselves, and they start being abusive, right? And then it's a health hazard that they need to bring the plane down, right? It becomes a biohazard, right? But also, like, some people are getting upset. So it's probably a physical safety thing. Like, the plane's going down. So it takes like 40 minutes for this plane to, from the decision, I don't know how long it would take. We got to have an emergency landing, guys. We got a biohazard on board. Somebody pooped their pants and the entire plane's getting sick from it. Yeah. My goodness, that's the situation. Can you imagine that poor fellow who did the diegesis, right? But then what about everybody else on that plane? All right, let's just extend it out for the poor fellow. He didn't just poop his pants. He made the plane land. That plane has got to be decommissioned for a week while they biohazard it in hazmat suits, right? Everybody has to get off the plane. Everybody has to find a different flight, or they all have to wait for a new plane to be recommissioned from, I don't know if there's a plane, a 737 just hanging around in Columbus, Missouri airport, or wherever they had to land. You know, they were going from New York to LA, and people are on that plane that have places to be. LA tonight, and it's not happening tonight. We're not going to be able to take off for 9 hours. That plane's not going to be ready for a week, right? So you've just completely inconvenienced everybody out of all kinds of potential issues. What if one of those people who was getting so angry was so upset because he was going to see his dying father in Los Angeles, and his father passed away, and he didn't get to see it because he was late? That, you could understand that person's anger, right? You know, so what about the person sitting next to that dude who's getting so angry? It smells for him too, but he's like so non-confrontational. He's getting like himself, he's getting like scared and kind of traumatized and upset, and he doesn't know what to do with it. He's overwhelmed with emotion because the dude next to him is just so upset. Yelling abuse at the pooper, right? Mr. Diegesis over there in 26E or whatever. And we're at like 9B. And the dude next to us is at 9C in the aisle, and he's standing up looking around like, sir, please take your seat. And he's just, I can't believe, whatever, right? I'm going to miss. And he starts crying and yelling because he loves his dad so much. But the dude sitting next to him's like, you know, he doesn't know what to do. He's about nauseated with the smell. He was maybe a little peeved at the pooper, but this guy next to him went crazy, and now he's like feeling sorry for the pooper, but starting to maybe kind of hate and fear the guy next to him. But now he sees him crying about his dad. He understands that dude's in a traumatic experience. He wasn't prepared emotionally for it. So he's all upset, right? There's a diabetic on the plane who forgot their insulin, and you know, it took 9 hours to get that luggage off that thing because the first priority was decontaminating that plane from poop and vomit, right? There wasn't tons of poop around, but like, you can't take any chances, right? If you're hypoallergenic glazing, what? disinfecting a plane from biohazard stuff. You don't just half-ass that, right? So yeah, you might be like, look, is this overkill? The dude just farted. He sharted on the plane. Well, we got to be here for 4 days with like sandblasters, throwing out seats, sandblasting the interior, because you don't know what that dude's carrying. You don't know if that dude was malicious and decided to, I don't know what he would do, right? You don't know if it's just on the seat is what I'm saying. He's got fingers. He's got malice. And now he's got poop, right? Could be. There's terrorists out there in the world. That's, he's a poop terrorist. I wonder everybody's so mad, right? But that plane, whatever it is, that plane's decommissioned. And so the last thing they were thinking about was taking out the luggage, which they have to do because we're not going to wait 9 days to fly this plane back to LA. These people are going to take on a plane hopefully later tonight as soon as we can get one in here. But we got to fly it down from Chicago because we don't got any extra 737s hanging out in Columbus, Missouri. And we only have 3 people working the night crew. They're not the ones cleaning. No, they get FEMA people. They flew out FEMA people from Atlanta with hazmat suits. They locked down the plane. Nobody could even get to the luggage until the FEMA people got there. 6 hours later, they flew on like Air Force jets. That's how they got there in like 2 hours. And like 2 hours after that, they finally start letting off the luggage. Dude with the insulin problem is just about he had to go to the emergency room because he had he needed the insulin. He had the high blood sugar somehow. I don't know. The stress got to him. The smell was sweet. I don't know, but he needed insulin. And so they had to take him to emergency room, right? So that person, what if that person died? You see what I'm saying? This kind of stuff. So I'm telling a story like this. I didn't talk about the insulin guy. I didn't know him before. Or the hazmat people from Atlanta per se. Or even the extra plane from Chicago. But I'm unreeling this story to my sister yesterday after we had Mexican food for lunch. And I started tearing up. I was so into it. It was crazy. I was getting choked up. Like it was hard for me to talk about the dude who lost his father in LA because he was going to see his dad on his deathbed tonight. He didn't think his dad would die tonight, but like his dad ain't seeing the week out for sure. And he loves his dad. And maybe he's he doesn't have the self-control. Maybe nobody would in that situation. That's what I'm saying. It's like maybe he's not an asshole. But his dad's been his best friend his whole life. His dad's the most beautiful man ever. But they live across country from each other, and his dad's sick, and he's going to fly out to see his dad before he knows his dad's dying this week. It's what happens. But he died tonight. He would have saw him. He would have been with him while he died. But instead he's in Columbus, Missouri. Wow, he can't even get to his luggage. Like 8 hours later, he gets a text from his sister who's out there at the hospital. Right? Which, he was afraid this would happen. And that's what happened. Nobody on the plane knows anymore or maybe they do, because he's in the airport because they're all waiting for that jet from Chicago. Now they're waiting for their luggage. And his dad just passed. And he just knew it was going to happen. It's 3 a.m. They would have been there 5 hours ago at this point, 6 hours ago. Now he's got another 2-hour flight from Columbus to LA. You bet that jet's going to be hitting 700 miles per hour up in the 40,000-foot solar breezes or whatever it is up there when the planes go real crazy. When they want to go fast, they can go fast. But meanwhile, this poor pooper. He got all cleaned up, but he's not waiting in that waiting room with those people. There's maybe about 4 people out of the, 97 people on board. I'm not sure how many were on board. Plus the crew. The flight attendants. Oh, man, imagine them. Imagine what they have to deal with. The smell. Like everyone else is making. One of them had to get sick. She couldn't. She's a professional, but she gagged. The rest of them have to keep the rest of the plane from going crazy. Try to do what they can to do anything for this. There's nothing to be done. The guy refuses to move, maybe. he just can't, because there's now a stain on his, I don't know, everybody knows, but you can see the crazy stuff like that could happen. And all 97 people on that plane, I would say souls, all 97 souls on that plane had their own spiritual, that's a spiritual experience. This was my whole point to my sister. Was like, could you imagine the spiritual, like something like that is a spiritual experience. How do you get through, you're on that plane for an hour and 50 minutes in the midst of this vomit-inducing smell. Any one of those 97 souls, the pilots can smell it. It's going through that door, right? So even the most equanimous soul on that plane's got to sit through that smell for 100 minutes. By the time it got to the most equanimous soul up in the front row, it had been 20 minutes since Mr. Pooper laid down that egg. And so 100 minutes before they were out the door. He was the only soul who didn't get emotional about it, because the nature of his equanimity was so deep. He was like a Tibetan Buddhist monk, maybe. But so that was a spiritual practice for him up there in row number 1. Do you breathe through your nose or to your mouth when you're in that situation? What kind of decisions do you have to make? Right? And then every other soul on that plane has to deal with it with somewhat less to greaterly less equanimity. Right? Equanimosity. Why do those words have to be so different from each other? Equanimitous. I think that's what I would say, not equanimous. But I guess that's why I'm here and not at the dictionary place where they make dictionaries. Or I guess where they make the dictionary words. You don't have to make dictionaries where you make the words for the dictionaries. Those are two different places. Yeah, okay, right. Deckard knows. Yeah, because you just build a dictionary, you print it and you build it. That's just manual labor. But the people who make the words for the dictionary, that's mental labor. They work in different buildings. I don't know why they didn't go equanimitous with it, though, instead of equanimous. That doesn't make sense. It's weird. Anyway, yeah. So the other 96 souls on this plane, the only way to get through this 100 minutes, which felt like 100 million hours to some people, was with an equanimitous practice. It became a spiritual, is what I'm saying. 444. Yeah, there was 3 people just yelled it out. There's a lot of bad golfers on this golf course. Fair enough. I think that's the third 4 that I've heard. The third set of 3 4s since I've been here 30 minutes ago. Yeah, so being able to deal with such an experience, could you imagine what it would take for the pooper to live the rest of their life? And then, people nowadays, back when I was growing up, that might make the news or the newspaper, but there were people who maybe would be like, look, we don't need to tell this story on the news and help ruin this guy's life. But quickly, some news executives, some marketer people are like, we don't care about that guy. We get ratings. National Enquirer type stuff, right? That became regular news. But then we got camera phones and social media. And you think there's people on there not taking pictures of this poor dude, making YouTube videos of it, right? Ruining this, potentially ruining this dude's life. And some of these video people are not even going to be malicious or even thinking about it. They're just reflexive. Then there's some who are so mad. They're just like, man, this guy's ruining my flight. I'm gonna contribute to the ruination of his life by making like a 10-minute video or a 40-minute video where we're just sitting here on the plane and I'm just filming this whole damn thing. And I hate this man so much for what he's done. And then that video gets 40 million views, and it's on Instagram and Twitter, and it just goes super viral. That person has to live the rest of their life like that. You know, that's, you gotta have compassion for people. What about the dude who filmed the dude who was so violent? I mean, he didn't punch anything, but I mean, he was so verbally abusive and so emotionally out of control. But then the story follows and you found out that his dad died later, and then people are so angry at the pooper, you know, that they try to show up to his house and, you know, wreck his life more, because the poor man loved his father so. They resonate with that story, right? I don't know. I should write a short story about this. This is how a story develops. I could write this story. Now what I got to do is research whether this happened. I can still write the story. Maybe that's what I'll do. I'll write the story just for myself and my sister, if I can, because, you know, I haven't written very many stories in my life, like, you know, not in recent years at all. So I can just be an exercise in writing a story. That's finally, I got something I can feel like I can write about. But how do I tell it, though? I wouldn't write it like it's happening. I would write it like this. I would narrate it like it would be a story about this dude named Deckard telling the story to some third party. You, but I mean, who doesn't know what happened? But Deckard would be talking about it like he just did. Like, we're in this universe. It's Deckard's universe. This thing just happened 4 years ago, and I'm just making a video about it. This dude on this plane going from New York to LA, 737, 97 souls aboard, right? Like 89 passengers and like 8 flight crew. I don't know, I'd have to do the math, the numbers on that. Probably not that much crew. And about an hour into the flight, they're over Pennsylvania. Or whatever, I'd have to do those numbers too. Mr. 29B, or 29E, has a shark attack. It's like a shark attack, but worse. Better, you keep all your limbs, you hope. Depends on how bad the shark attack is, because it's the consequences of the shark attack. That's how it's also unlike a shark attack, but it's worse because the consequences could get greater. Like in this case, like in the story I'm about to tell. So 29E, Mr. 29E, was a mister, shattered himself about an hour into this flight. And, well, I'm going to keep this long story long, but to make it quite short, this is about to be a long story. So, imagine just for a second, or a minute, just for a minute, what it might be like to be Mr. 29E, right? You just, 5 minutes ago, you were settling in to the flight, reading your book, and then all of a sudden you start feeling something. Let's just say it could happen any number of ways. And maybe I get into that, maybe I don't. This is really a story about bad diet. No, it's not the story about that. It's a story about empathy and compassion and spiritual practice and how you deal with the worst situations in your life, maybe. Like Aesop would tell it. Like a fable, fabulistically. And 4 minutes ago, he was starting to feel a rumble in his stomach that was weird. Out of nowhere. Out of nowhere. But he went back to his book, it's whatever. And here's the crucial difference. The next rumble wasn't for over 2 minutes after the first rumble. It was inside minute 2. Before tee off time here, before tea time. He had about 115, or what was 2 minutes? Yeah, 115 seconds when the second rumble hit. And that's when he thought. And then a cramp hit. I don't know how it would be minute by minute. I think that's going to be, what will that be? It's got to be 3 o'clock. Yeah, for sure. For sure it's 3 o'clock. So, yeah, imagine for a minute being Mr. 29B. You go from 5 minutes ago, one more, right? Can't be another one. Yeah, I'm pretty good with my times. My times in the abstract, like what time of day is it without a watch? I feel like I'm pretty good at guessing, but there's one of those black and blue butterflies. That's cool. See what I'm saying? There's a lot of butterflies out here, way more than in my apartment. But what I can't tell you is what it was like last year, because I wasn't out here last year. But I feel like there's more this year. But of course I feel like that, because for me, since I wasn't even outside to see a butterfly at all, hardly ever, it is more. But I feel like it's a lot more. Like I see like, I bet you I've seen close to a dozen butterflies today. Maybe not 12 different ones, but 12 separate flights of them fluttering around. I bet I've seen 8 butterflies 12 times in the last 3 hours, 2 hours since I've been out. I like that. Anyway, back to the story, right? So you imagine for a minute, it was an ant crawled up my whole body. And then he got on my arm, or he fell from a tree, or he blew from a tree, or he jumped from this rock onto my back and then crawled down. He was on my forearm right here. But I'm standing the whole time I'm standing. I haven't sat down once. There's definitely ants around here, but that's a heroic ant to crawl up. I mean, that's 5 feet of human. He just crawled up vertical. How many more might be doing that? Probably not. He's like a superhuman ant. He's the only one who could do that. Just so happened we coincided today. But yeah, you imagine for a minute those last 5 minutes of peace before his life just changed. And make no mistake about it, his life changed forever when he sharded himself. Now, if it had been a less obstreperous shart, it might not have been so bad. If and this and that and whatever, you could if all the way to eternity. It was what it was. I don't know if it was the worst it could have possibly been, but you can't gainsay me that it changed his life so dramatically. It probably might as well not have been able to be any worse than it was. At least in the beginning. And by beginning, I don't mean the beginning of this episode flat. I mean in terms of the what this person has done with the last 4 years, having to live that experience down. The experience that's about to happen has just started to happen. When he lets out this shart, that he's like, oh, he didn't even know it was happening. There was no malice here. He was not a terrorist. Trying to shart up a plane? No, sir. He, more than anybody, I guarantee you, more than anybody of the 97 souls, his soul more than anyone, well, maybe not his soul, because we'll get to that later, but he more than anyone didn't want that experience to happen. And it happened to him. And the first minute when it happens, can you imagine that minute? When you realize what happened, but you have no idea what's about to happen over the next 2 hours and 4 years. Like I said, this story happened 4 years ago in Deckard's universe. And that first minute, he's like, it goes from what are the 4 stages of grief, right? Or 7 stages of rage, or, 5 stages of complete, utter surrender. Because very quickly it goes from denial to panic to anguish. At some point, it's got to get to surrender, or, he's got to jump out that plane, right? Because this plane ain't going anywhere for 2 hours. He doesn't know that yet. Nobody does, but the pilots kind of know. If you were to say, hey, Mr. Pilot, before we take off here, about an hour in, you're about to have a Biohazard episode on your hands. How long you take to land this thing? Say it take probably, I don't know, if we were over Pennsylvania, it might take an hour. I don't know. Let's just say that's what it was in Deckard's universe. So if it took an hour before the pilots knew anything about it, as the plane just, it takes an hour, it takes, whatever it takes, right? It's long like that. And Mr. 29B, or 29E, I keep saying B, no, because it's number 9B, is the angry man whose father passed away. Whose father was passing away as the flight was getting underway, getting the delay. And then, yeah, everybody's having to deal with this. So yeah, we talk about all that stuff. Different. I don't know. That's what you write a story about, though, right? You figure out, I'm not going to tell a story with 97 souls experiences. That's too overwhelming, right? But which souls do you pick, and how do you introduce them? I'm going to only introduce them on the plane. Everybody's already on the plane. There's no pre-plane life in the story. It's in mid-flight. It's already taken off by the time I start narrating the story, right? I'm not sure when. Is it happening in real time? Do I imagine that I'm telling the story in kind of like a real time? So I kind of started 10 minutes before tee off to set it up. And then, yeah, here we go. We're doing it. We got a little clock counter at the top. It's like T-minus 9 minutes. All right, let me set the scene, everybody. This is flight A47B6 going from Newark Airport, EWR, to LAX. Flight time 5 hours 49 minutes or whatever, right? I set it up and then T-minus 6 minutes. So we're on the flight. That's going to change everybody's life, and I keep going like that, right? And then it's like T-minus 5 minutes. I introduce Mr. 29E. There's a little fly bird dogging me, fly dogging me, hawking at me. Flies can't hawk. They can't. That's what you think they can't, but they can't. They're flies, they're not hawks, but they can act like hawks. Trust me, it was just hawking at my ear. Anyway, it's nice. Now it's getting a little sunny for a minute and the breeze is picking up. Look, there's blue sky coming. Sorry, I get excited when it's been like this all day, which is nice, it's fine. It's been so nice. And then but I've seen some blue and I feel like the wind is coming from the south. It's got to be southish. And the blue is to the north. So how's it getting here? I don't know. Swirling winds. I just hope. And the breeze picked up, and it's still cool out here. There's another 4. This is like this might be the nicest. From being out here hiking in it, I can't remember the last time I had such a nice, non-sweaty, really hike. From just a skin sensitivity standpoint, I don't know what kind of stand. I mean, I've had really nice hikes throughout the last 90 days, but the temperature on my skin and the breeze, it's just, it's been a minute. This is why I like to get out here, but like I said, have I said that before? I haven't been out. It's been 6 days since I've been out. I don't know if even I was up here last Tuesday. Today's Monday. Today's the next Monday. It's the 18th of August. So we're into the second half of August, which is the last third of summer as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, this is what August 18th feels like. I realize I never finished that story. Just how you would tell it. Introduce different characters already on the plane. 29E, 9B, 9A, or is it 9C and 9? I think it would be 9B and 9A. And 1B, right? That's the monk. And the pilot, and the co-pilot, and that engineer or whatever the third one is, and then what, like 3 flight attendants, 6, 91 passengers, total of 97 souls aboard. Talk about a number of different I don't even know why I would talk about it. It would just be, I would just narrate it like a kind of a pretty stream of consciousness. We're talking about 29. Yeah, there's transitions. I don't know when I get to 9B, but I would get to 9A after 9B maybe. And then who else I would talk about before I went from 29E to 9B, you know? Somebody else before the stewardess, maybe the first stewardess knows, the flight attendant. She's the second one besides 29E to notice it, because she's serving them. Not when it happens, but how long? I would have to do some thinking about how long before it becomes, other people can smell it. Probably, your neighbor next to you in less than a minute, for sure, probably 30 seconds, right? So that's the first person besides 29. So 29, it's not a full flight. So there's nobody sitting in 29, what is it, A, B, C, D, in 29D. It's like an A, B, and then it's a C, D, E. Is that it? E is the window seat. 29E likes the window. 29D is empty. 29C, though, she's the first person to smell it. And then there's nobody in 28E, but there's a 30E behind you. It's this second person to smell it. And then the flight attendant is the third. All within the first 2 minutes, maybe. I don't know, that's not how you would really tell the story, though. I'm just like, would I even construct the story? I guess I would. Like a timeline. And do it as a storyboard, kind of like with the timeline of, start talking about this, and then this, the spreading, the timeline of the spread of the miasma of his shart. And then it would just be like a pond ripple. He just sharted a pebble into that pond. The pond of everybody's life. Everybody's life pond just got sharted on with a shart pebble. Because the ripples of the effects of this next 2 hours of this flight, and then to a significant degree the next 6 hours after that, or 9, or I don't know, I'd have to figure it out, before they were able to get back on the plane. No further incidents, or maybe there were. We didn't even talk about the second flight yet. So finally that plane, not finally, I mean, they did their best. They got it out of the hangar in Chicago. They got it down there in 3 hours. Right? And it got started it was a whatever, or whatever. It was the contaminated plane with the charter and the 96 souls in a charter soul, a soul who charted, and the 96 others. They've been on the ground for 2 hours before the Chicago jet, because they airlifted that guy out, right? Let's say it took an hour for this plane to land in Columbus, Missouri. But they knew they were trying to land for an hour. And so they're like, there's no planes in Columbus, Missouri. Yeah, we got a biohazard, grade A1. So scramble the team from Atlanta to come decommission this jet and super hypoallergenate it, or whatever they do with them sandblasters and, getting in there with microscopes. You don't want a bacillus carrying on with this jet. You don't want the lawsuits. But it's still cheaper to get it all cleaned than to totally decommission the plane. So they're going to do it again, but you're not flying on it again. These passengers, it's going to take a week for that plane to be cleaned. So They flew this other plane down. They scrambled it. It's only like a 90-minute flight from Chicago to Columbus, Missouri, maybe. But it took about 90 minutes for them to prep that plane out of the hangar. But they were doing that while our man's plane was still an hour out of Columbus. Because they had to scramble people. It was like 10 o'clock at night or something. And, it's Columbus, Missouri, let's say. I don't even know. It's a small airport, but it's the best one they could get to the quickest. Well, after everything's all said and done, they got their luggage off the contaminated plane, and they're all on the new plane, all of them who wanted to be. Some of them actually had to stay a night in the Columbus, Missouri airport hotel for various reasons that we could maybe or maybe not get into in this story. But of the 97 souls, there was going to be, because the pilots and all the crew was still working, actually, because it's Columbus, Missouri. It's not like they were in Columbus, Ohio, or St. Louis, Missouri, where they, the crews could shift. I don't know. I would work out those logistics. But for the sake of it saying, right now to get to a number, for the sake of the number, 97 minus how many people stayed in Columbus, Missouri? It was so bad that 30 of them stayed, including our traumatized Sharter himself. 29E would absolutely, nobody would recommend that you fly with the other 67 souls. Just, who knows? Maybe there's 10% of them who are, feel bad for you. But, man, you need to just give everybody some time and space after that. Because it's a crazy inconvenience, right? Plus, like I said, the 100 minutes in the air where you just did everything you could to not vomit all over yourself. It was that bad. They wouldn't have landed the plane if it wasn't that bad. That's the whole point. It was a biohazard that they had to land the plane. But everybody wanted them to land the plane. That was it. Half the reason they said it was such a biohazard, which it probably was, but look, the dude just shattered himself, right? But we're going to treat it like let's play up the biohazard part. This is what the airline was doing from a lobbying standpoint, advertising or whatever. Yeah, we're the plane where the dude shattered, but look what we did about it. You should fly us, right? So their marketing department took control and said, look, we're going to turn this into a biohazard thing because we have to land the plane. Could we have taken, if it didn't smell so bad, but the real problem was the violence it would have instigated on board. There was only 3 flight attendants. It's like 91 passengers. Not all of them were angry, violent, but half of them were getting sick. 10% of them were threatening violence, right? Like we had to get people off this plane. People were threatening flight attendants because they were like, they got to land the plane. They wanted to land the plane. They forced us to land the plane. Maybe that's the way I would spin it. Right, but as far as everybody's concerned, no. Airline company never lost control of the flight. Not once. Nope. We landed because it was a federal biohazard grade A1. Right? And there was purging and passing had happened. One dude passed a shart, and other people started to purge their vomit. And then, we don't even know at this point what's going on. People are very upset. So we had to take actions, had a responsibility for health. They're not going to admit, airline company's not going to admit that they lost control of that flight because it was so vile and crazy. More than a few passengers were threatening things or something, maybe, right? We got to land this plane. If they don't land this plane, we're going to be on this for 4 hours. And, the pilots, if it wasn't for the pilots, they would still be up in the air. Because the pilots also, even though they were behind that front door, they could smell it too. It was just as and then the whole air circulation thing, but you cannot circulate the air, otherwise you suffocate people up there, right? They had to breathe all that stuff. So ultimately, the whole plane was saturated. Trust me, it doesn't take 100 minutes to saturate a 737 with a Shart, with all that recycled air. I don't know why you would trust me. I don't know why I would take such a hard stand on it, but that's the nature of Deckard's universe in the story. And this 737, the pilots were feeling almost as bad as, 29C, who had fainted from just the exhaustion of vomiting so much. She had some Dramamine. All her Dramamine that she took passed her out. But yeah, the pilots, it took them, they had to circle because it took them arguing on behalf of landing this plane to the authorities, the various authorities, to get permission to land in Columbus, Missouri. It took them like 30 minutes of like hard bargaining because it wasn't really, look, dude, how bad is it going to be? You know, we have to wake up, whatever, right? The grounds crews of these places who are like, they don't know what it's like up there. Like, what are you talking about? Somebody pooped their pants? Take them to the bathroom. First of all, bro, you don't know what's going on back there in this plane. That's what the pilot's like. Look, the engineer's back there. He's watching. He's reading reports. The door's open now because everybody's on our side. They know what's going on, and we need to see what's going on back there. And they've turned back. We can't move that guy out of his seat. There's dudes with baseball bats out there. If he gets out of his seat, somebody's going to take him out. That's what we're dealing with up here. The smell is bad. It's that bad that people are threatening violence if we don't land the plane, right? And yeah, we're trying to land the plane. The reason we have this door open is so everybody can hear us yelling at you guys to get us to land this plane, and so they don't come kill us. They're going to come in here and kill us and take over this plane. They don't know how to fly a 737. It's the only reason we're still alive. Well, now we've convinced them we're on their side, which we are. So it was the hero pilots that actually prevented a full-on mutiny. But it was basically a mutiny. The only way these pilots could survive the situation is by aligning with the mutineers, which they did out of also aligned values, not just personal salvation. Is it salvation? I think when you save yourself, it's a salvation of yourself. I could write that story. That might be my first story that I write. Let's see if I could put so it's real easy to talk about it, but as you can see, it's not a refined story. But it's at least somewhat of a story that happened because I was able to simply just talk about it. If you said you can either never talk about it, but you have to write it, or just never even write about it, but you can never talk about it, then that story probably never even happened. You know what I'm saying? Like, I wouldn't just be like inspired and then all of a sudden start writing this thing. No, it came out the way it came out on this video, and now that's inspired me to maybe refine it by writing it into a story, by writing it down. Because I'm having fun with these different things. And just finding different layers of, because ultimately it's in the service of like compassion, and like it's a beautiful look. That experience for everybody would be, could you go in there and take that Tibetan monk in 1B and 1-better him? You could 1B him. You could 1B 1B. Because we don't know what that monk's got. He's the most equanimous, yeah, of the 97 souls. But how equanimous is he? But like, as the narrator, I'm the most equanimous of it because, well, first of all, I don't have to be there and smell it. So that makes it the easiest part. But like, I'm trying to be into the souls and feel it for every one of these 97 people, and it's beautiful. It's like, I'm not judging anyone, and you can't. That's the point. If you're not on that flight, you cannot judge anybody. That's the thing. Even the person that seems like the most jerk that you want to hate, that you just so identify with hating, I'll tell you a story about them. And hopefully if I can convey that story right, you come away feeling like, yeah, right? Not even begrudgingly. Like, yeah, man, that guy had it rough. I had no idea, right? Not because I'm such a, that's ambitious. But that's kind of where I got off on this whole story with my sister is just trying to, for some reason, is talk about how, like, these different experiences, like, you could see the same situation from all these different experiences, and if you look at it, like, just staying non-judgmental about it and just accepting the experience for what it is, you can really love and live and love your life. Like, every experience can be like that if you can just, you can see all these different perspectives and learn that, like, I don't know what's going on in the world, in anybody's life, let alone anybody's life. How can I judge any situation, right? Like, I don't know why, it just occurred to me, but, judging takes so much energy and expertise, and, right, like, and I never even think of it, like, how much work it is to judge. I just automatically judge, but, like, it's so much easier to not judge, and it's so much better to not judge. It makes life better because it's easier, and it's more compassionate, it's nicer, it's more nicer, right? It's compassionater, right? Get rid of the more. That's a double standard, double redundancy. If you say more compassionater, you don't need the more. That's why you add the ER on it. Compassionate and compassionater. But it's even more compassionater. That's why I'm doubling down on it. I'm double down on it. Right? And it's not like for anybody else. It's just, that's what it is more compassionate. But what it feels like is, like, easier. Not like, just like smoother, like nicer, like smoother, like funner, more engageder. I feel more engaged with the situation. And it becomes like smiling or too. Or it can be sadder. Like, I got myself all teared up talking about that. Those two dudes in 29E and 9B. The situations that this universe conspired to put them in. And every other soul on board. All 95 others. And it's just a beautiful, amazing experience in life that every one of them had, and it changed them all forever. And I would write a novel about how it changed them all forever, or any of them forever. And by forever I mean like the duration of their lives. But for the short story, I don't know. I'd have to think about it. But it's pretty cool that I got this idea. That's pretty quirky. So I could write it and get some experience writing and expressing myself with a story. And then I would Google it and see if it actually happened. And if it did, how did it happen? How did it happen, like, Because I wouldn't want to, like, write a bestseller that brings to mind this dude from 12 years ago in the real universe. That person almost, ended their own life 3 times already because of and if you were to write a best-selling book about it, even if it was not really about that person, it's about this whole thing, and there was such a person, it didn't have a good life-expanding experience from it in the end, which my guy's going to have. It remains super traumatic, which is completely understandable, and it feels tragic. I wouldn't want to pile on. So then I would have the story that I wrote, the only great story, but it's a great one. Right? The Harper Lee of the Charter. I could never publish it because it actually would devastate there was an actual charter, even though I wrote the whole story without Googling any of it. I suspect that I probably heard about it one time years ago when it happened and then just, never thought about it again, but it's been stewing, building this story in my head for like 12 years in my medullum or wherever the thing is in the back of your head that does the stewing. And I never knew, but this is it, and it's called The Charter, and I wrote it. And it's everybody loves it. And then I was like, I'm going to get this published, but then I was like, I got to look, because what if there's a charter who didn't have a wonderful experience in the end? And then, is it even just about the charter? The charter would have been the most traumatized. What about the other 96 souls? If I wrote a book, the book wouldn't be about them, though. Or would it be? I don't know. See, I would have I couldn't, in good conscience. What would I do? If the story was that special, I would probably reach out to every 97 one of them. And have them, and talk to them, and then ask them if they wanted to read my story. And then get their thoughts. Do they think I should replace that word? I should replace that word. Get their editorial, creative writing critique first, and their permission second. Is it good enough, do you think? Because I'd be so insecure still. You think this is good enough to get published? I would ask, soul number 36, what do you think? Because I'd be going to all of them, all 97 of them, asking them if they would read my manuscript, and then tell me their thoughts. Notes first, and then thoughts on, do you think this would bother you? And then, depending on the results, I might have to scrap the whole project. I couldn't just change names. I already changed the names. I didn't even know there were real names. I didn't even use their real names. I only found out after I had written the masterpiece that it was a real thing that could still trigger people, I don't want to be a bully, but it's such a good story, right? Because it wasn't really me who wrote it. It was like the universe wrote it through me. It's saturated my cerebellum, medullum. What's that part of the root stem of your brain that stews everything up? When you get an idea from something, it starts to sparkle and sprinkle up in there for like a decade, all on your subconscious in your medullum or something, right? So yeah, that's not me. I just am like the conduit for it to write itself, so I can't take no credit for it. Which is, I guess then I would have no ego, and so. But what if it was so great that it really it's a tragedy to humanity that it wasn't published? Is there such an artwork? There probably is. There probably are artworks of such magnificent quality that that the gods decided that this has to be made no matter what, because it would be unfair to humanity as a whole if this artwork didn't exist. I'm not saying it's that good. But I mean, what if it was, I think unless it was that good, which I'm not trying to say it would be that good, that's an all-timer. What are those even? The greatest artworks that people would say that would be, like, people who aren't, Fairmont Fairbanks wearers, people who had a grasp of reality who'd even still say, like, yeah, that would be, we couldn't, pretty much nobody in their right mind would say, yeah, Shakespeare would be one of those artists. But that's he wrote a lot. But, any one of the main big plays would be like a tragedy to humanity if that wasn't written. But most of humanity didn't get to experience it because he only wrote them in like 1500. Right? But still. I'm not trying to claim that. So if I can't claim that, then, yeah. If even one person, if I took the ego completely out of it, then if even one of the 97 souls had an issue with not my grammar or punctuation or stylistics, but just it triggered them, I would have to just, okay, and not ever publish it. And not ever become famous and rich. because 36C, she just couldn't ever overcome that trauma of that flight. And then, like I was going to say before, and then I'll end this video, we haven't even talked about the second flight yet. The flight where 67 of the 97 souls, 6 hours later, left Columbus, Missouri for Los Angeles at like 3 a.m. And the nature, how nasty and then ultimately beautiful that flight. I don't know what that flight would be like. How mean-spirited and toxic the atmosphere was for the first 15 minutes of that second flight. And then 3 different people stood up within 5 seconds of each other on the plane. Not the flight attendants. The door was closed. The pilots were just like a normal flight now. So there's 61 people on the plane. 3 of them stood up within like boom, boom, boom. And they each started talking from their heart. Compassion and sympathy. And for the next 3 hours of this flight, the 61 people, it was like a group therapy session. Where like they were all just sharing their stories of the last 6 hours of their life. In almost like real time. That's what the novel would be. I'll write the story of the initial flight, Z9 or 6D from, whatever it is, right? From New York, that ends up landing, 3 hours later or whatever. I'll figure out the timing. 100 minutes in the air with that stench and, plus whatever launch up time to the short, the countdown to the short. That whole story, that flight, that's the story. And I don't know where it would end. Does it end? I don't know what scene it would end with, but I mean, in the timeline, where does it end? Does it end when 29E closes his hotel room door? Does it end after the second flight takes off? I don't know. But that would be the story, and then the whole second flight becomes the novel. And maybe it's not, super long. And maybe that's the wrong way to do it. But there's more characters in the novel. But the story is, I don't know, whatever. We could see. But that's how you do it, right? You could do it like that. Because otherwise the novelty of the charter will get lost in the big picture of the second flight, which is the much bigger overall story, right? Because we're talking about therapy for 61 people. Plus the 3 flight attendants joined in. So there was 64, and the pilots, they had to do their job. But they turned on the speaker and they could hear. Would they be distracted? I don't know. I don't know how much pilots need to pay attention while they're flying, I'm not sure how I would write that. But it's like, yeah, what would you write about? Maybe you would want to separate it. I would want to separate them. Because one's all about the chart and that plane. And then the other one's all about how pretty much 2/3 of everybody else. And then maybe it's only 3 people who stay and not 30. It's the 2 people who really were sick, but they were kind of old. But they got sick and they're weak and they need to rest. And the charter himself was not he wasn't going to put himself on that plane. And to be honest, at the time, nobody wanted him on that plane, and he needed to go to the hotel room and do everything anyway. Unwind, clean up, right? Decompress after the major experience. So then I guess there would be multiple stories coming off of that. What's it like for the other 94 souls on that second flight? I mean, these numbers have to change eventually, but I'm trying to stay consistent with it. And what's up for those 2 people who stayed, and then what's up for the Sharter himself? That'd be the second. It started as a short story, and then flight number 2 was the first novel of a trilogy. It's like The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. So the Sharter is the title of the story. It's called The Sharter, and it's like The Hobbit. And it's all about that first flight. I'm not sure when it ends, but that's what it is. And it's a story, but it might be a long one. It might be a novella. It might be like 95 pages. It's an epic poem in free verse. It's going to be epic. Otherwise, why write it? That's my approach. I don't know if I have the skills. I'm sure I don't have the skills. Could I acquire the skills? I don't know. To be seen. Then I started the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and the first book, I don't know what the name is, Flight Number 2 right now is its working title. And that's what I just described, right? But it's 94 souls, not 67. And they have their 3.5 hours flight to LA that they're doing at 3 in the morning now on this clean flight with everybody but 3. The second book in the trilogy is going to be the Sharter, from the, his perspective from, I'm not sure. Would it be when he got off the first flight? Would it just be the whole thing? But just from his perspective only the whole time? I don't know. It depends on what the story is. How much 29E Sharter guy did, was a story about. I mean, I presume it would be a lot about him. So then the second book in the trilogy could maybe just be like the Sharter's life. From the time he got off the plane until whatever the story I tell about him is in book 2. And then book 3 of the trilogy, I don't know what that would be. Is there even a natural one? Probably not. I don't feel like there's anything that's like, I just did the trilogy. The first book, the story is the first volume of the trilogy. And then the second one is the second flight. And then the last one is the Sharter from the time he got off flight 1 to present day, which maybe culminates in like a 10th anniversary, like a lot and the shit that went down in the last intervening 10 years with him and with everybody else on that flight. Right? That's probably the way to do it. The Sharter, first volume in a new trilogy by up-and-coming writer Deckard. It'll pull your heartstrings and teach you wisdom lessons about compassion and the nature of the human soul, maybe. The second 2 volumes to be published subsequently. Because the second one is the thick one. It's the second flight. Now it took me 2 years to write that. It only took me 3 months to write the Sharter because it was nonstop inspiration from pretty much when I end this video. When I go home after I finish this circuit, I'm gonna keep stewing on it in my medullum, whatever's back there in your head that you just stew ideas in. I'm gonna pretend I never thought of it. I'm not gonna go writing this stuff down so I don't forget. I can watch this video. Well, but I'm going to end this video. I'm going to go continue my circuit. And I'm going to get back pretty much nonstop for the next 3 months, write this story. And then all the homework. What if, though, what if I Google it and there is no real story? This is totally made up. That would be the best. I can't imagine that that's what's going to happen, but I'm not going to check until I'm really into the story, because I don't want to influence the story. The story's coming from my nervous system and the universe. They're collaborating together in my medullum, right? I just said stewing all these ideas up from what I thought was maybe an actual experience, maybe whenever, 10 or 15 years ago. And I just stored it, and I didn't know the story was writing itself in the back of my medullum for the last 15 years, but it has been, and now it's coming out. It wants to come out like a shark. Nothing's going to stop it. And I can either work with that, which I plan to do for the next 3 straight months, and come up with a story called The Sharter, or I can give up in advance without even trying, which I'm not going to do that. But I would love for me to Google this whenever I do, after I get started, maybe not even until after I finish The Sharter, because I want no influences of a real universe kind, if this did happen. But I would love to find out that it never did happen. I feel like it did, though. I hope it didn't, because then if it did, I have to go get permission from everybody. I don't want to hurt no one's feelings. So this novel's really about the story, about writing that story about The Sharter. And you just learn through little tidbits. I assume you've read it. That's the whole narrative device of the meta story here. But, I talk about it. And of course you haven't read it because it doesn't exist. The only thing you know about The Sharter is what I'm describing here as the author, so-called author of The Sharter. New York Times best-selling, Pulitzer Prize-winning first novel by Deckard, right? Again, I'm not taking credit for it. I'm just saying, if I could write something that grand in this universe, Deckard's universe, that's what happened. But all you know about it, because that didn't actually happen in this universe. So I can't really talk to you like it's an actual story that Deckard wrote. I can only talk to you about what I'm talking to you about right now. But what if, over the next 90 days, I did sit down and write The Sharter? And it was good. And I actually did start writing the second flight, and ultimately planned on concluding a trilogy with 29E in Volume 3. I mean, there's a universe where that's happening. So maybe I'm aligned to that universe. I'm not going to put all that pressure on me to write like 1,000 pages. But I'll start with The Sharter. All right.